the place where creatives connect, support, and cultivate each other's artistic journey. Today, we are talking to the lovely Melony Smirniotis. She is a textural painter, and she will correct me on that if I didn't fill all of that in. But welcome, Melony. Thanks for doing the interview with Art and Up, which is us anyway.
It is indeed. Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it, hoping I can answer everything and provide some sort of insight that is comprehensive.
Yeah, we want to be sticky beaks, actually. So I want to know first, Melony, were you always creative as a child, or did that happen later on in life?
Oh no, it started pretty early on. I do recall signing autographs, on my 3-year-old little texter pictures.
Yeah,
Thinking one
okay.
day this might be worth something. I don't know where I picked it up from, but I did attend a few galleries when I was quite little, and I remember I still get the same feeling when I visit the Art Gallery of New South Wales now, um, where I was just in awe, completely awestruck. And my mother was a painter, so I'd sit there and watch her do her landscapes, and I recall being at my grandmother's house, and I was probably around 6 or 7 years old, and asked my mother to draw me a face, and
Mm-hmm.
she drew this face, beautiful face of this lady, and it's almost like time slowed down as I was watching her, and I made this promise to myself that I would teach myself to draw hands and faces, and then I could draw anything. And it was just this I don't know, and I think that was a seed that was planted, and I just started and I didn't stop, and I instantly found an oasis, like this sanctuary, this go-to place, that it was like this I suppose an escape in a way.
Did you see that in your mother too? Like it sounds like you always had paints and things like that. Of being creative was encouraged at home. It wasn't seen as an odd wasting time type of thing. It was always something that you saw her doing and kind of looked at her with respect to do, as though it was almost a magic thing that she had.
Yeah, kind of. I think because she wasn't prolific. She was, just, it was more of a on the side project. She's gone on now to writing, but and she did let go of her painting when my younger sister was born. But she left her stuff around, and she gifted me her oil paints and her books. And I remember one of her first art books that she gifted me. The title was "Mistakes Can Be Your Best Friend," and I didn't quite understand. And as soon as I started reading that, and it providing context when I was older, I think really, in retrospect, that I did start to embed that in my practice in terms of experimenting and allowing myself to let go of the outcome, and layering the work. And maybe that's where the mixed media sort of came in terms of the layer upon layer, and really investing in the journey and the process. Yeah, I feel like in this point in my art life, I can oversee this aerial view of a tapestry of all these events and connections and experiences. Definitely. I don't know that it was an encouraged thing in my house to paint or to be creative. It was something that I was very much known for, and mum and dad knew that if they sent me to my room, there was no point, because I'd be excited by that because I'm creative.
Those things. We like those. We like being isolated, and it's sort of entertainment, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was.
So how did that evolve from when you were being a kid and you liked art stuff? What did you do? How did that lead you into any type of professions you had when you finished school? What happened, and how did that creative input flow through, or did it stop?
No, I don't think it ever stopped. I think it took it was less a priority at certain points. In I went and did a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Kingswood, and that was, what was that, 94. That was the beginning of something really magnificent, because that gave me an opportunity to practice a more conceptual um, process, and to immerse myself in, and maybe more the historical and practical, and just gave me this range, and it was working with international artists as well as my lecturers. I looked up to them. I watched them, and as I was a mature student as well, I didn't go in fresh after school, um, and I liked the way they spoke so passionately, and they were so invested in every aspect of what they were doing. It resonated with me because I don't do things. Um,
So everything mattered.
everything mattered. The way they spoke, their body language. They came.
Serious approach then.
Yeah, they came to life when they were talking about what they were doing. And I think talking about that aerial, tapestry view of my life and joining the dots, I can see now where I'm at, how my time at uni really nurtured that love of story, the love of narrative, and tying everything together. And I really saw it as a very much a way of, um, it was authentic. What they were talking about, they didn't just practice themselves, they'd studied and they'd experimented and they'd failed and they'd collaborated. And it was just this whole holistic approach. It wasn't this,
Wasn't accidental. It wasn't. It was work, really, really hard work every step of the way, and it was considered. And they had a direction, and they worked at it, whether it was a success or not. It was considered, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent. And so there's a little bit you just skipped there. Like, I went to school, and then I was a mature age student. What did you do in the middle bit?
Well, quite interesting. My in year 10, I was offered a sign writing apprenticeship and really wanted to leave. I wasn't a big fan of school, and my parents persuaded me to stay on, and saying that I'd go on to do I always wanted to do special effects in movies, special effects makeup, and I was always practicing in my bedroom as a kid, different, whether it was drawing on myself or drawing on the wall, or creating these crazy sculptures. It was just always active, but I'd look to how things could be transformed in cinema, on the body and all these illusions, and I was quite fascinated. So I took mum and dad's advice and did rather well in the HSC for visual arts, and thought it would be what I was going to do. And it turned out that the course was far, too expensive at the time, and just didn't work out. So I actually went into hairdressing, which is quite
By
interesting.
choice, or was it just what was on the paper at the time?
Pretty much, pretty much. Look, I kind of wanted a job. I just wanted something that was available at the time that I thought I could do, well in. It turned out I wasn't a big fan, but I was very good at upstyles. So I immediately, my sculptural side,
Yeah, great.
seemed to work, and it became a side job that ended up paying for all my art materials and my art life, because as you know, art materials are rather expensive. And my signature work with hair, I suppose, became quite a very much like a sculpture, a piece of art. So that sort of created a point of difference in the industry for me in that way. And I ended up continuing that for 22 years. And I ended up traveling everywhere. It was great. I could go and do a gig out in the middle of nowhere and get paid quite well, and I could be sketching and taking photos at the same time.
And have I got that right too? You did makeup as well. It was hair and makeup, wasn't it? So
Yeah.
that's where the full circle thing comes around with you in your bedroom and the makeup and the stage makeup. I suppose a wedding is the biggest stage most people are going to get. So
Yeah.
you sort of got there anyway.
And
how did that stop then? What made you close that?
Well, fast forward. I mean, a lot of things happened in between. After my Bachelor of Fine Arts, I went on to do a diploma of education and ended up throwing myself into teaching for a couple of decades in high school. So I was running this business, hair and makeup, painting every night, and teaching with a family as well. When I say it out loud, it's a bit crazy. But I don't know, because I've always done what I love, to an extent. There's always been that edge of the day that I'd find, and deliberate. I was very deliberate in closing the doors and turning all the, distractions off and escaping into that.
Oh,
That kept me going. And I was still exhibiting, from way back in uni up until today.
so what kind of things were you painting in the beginning then? What
Oh,
back in those times? You mentioned about performance and things like that.
yeah.
What were
I,
you
I
doing?
was yeah, at uni. I was very much into installation, sculpture, and photography. They were my my main loves. I did love everything though. I found it difficult to just fine tune what I loved, but I was always very tactile. There was no doubt from the time that I was a small kid in my room creating these Lego cities to you know I'd be in my room looking around at the landscape and think, if those drawers were on that table, and then if I changed that around and the light hit it that way, like I just, yeah,
Oh, so it was
no,
always there, that
always,
three-dimensional capturing some sort of more than just a picture type of thing.
definitely. And I recall feeling always, so incredibly different to other kids, but not in a good way, for the most part. you know, we'd be, we'd be out and I'm be looking at the veins of a leaf and just be, you know, completely in awe of that. And then I go off into this, fantasy world in my head, and I could never quite concentrate on much unless it was really creative. And I'm still the same to this day. I can admit it and be at peace with it. But it caused me a bit of grief in school in terms of forever
Distracted,
distracted.
always distracted and not concentrating. But
Always.
you were concentrating on the things you liked. Usually, they were just in your head or out the window. Often, I think
Yeah.
that's it.
Often
Now
out
you could
there.
be recognised as an over talented kid and be put into a special class probably to kind of let those things grow.
Oh,
But it was a different era, I suppose, in that time.
such a
Everyone had to
difference.
toe the line. We went through those professions. You went off and you're in, you've done your visual arts, you've done teaching. So when did you begin introducing yourself as an artist versus the teacher, which most people would have known you as? That was your job, and we're all defined mainly by what we do, not what we want to do.
Mm.
And so when was that time when you sort of felt, I'm going to say brave enough to say, I'm an artist?
Well, look, I think it was probably approximately a decade ago, and it took me a long time because I would look at other artists who were working full time, and I would think, okay, well, you're an artist because that's your full time job and that's your only job, and because I had, um, a few different jobs, I felt like I couldn't just put one down, and the fact was, for many years, I mean, I worked in disabilities, I worked in retail, I taught, worked in the hair and makeup industry. I was exhibiting twice, sometimes three times a year. My work, I was doing so many different things, but I was doing them because there were many different things happening simultaneously in my life, and I couldn't commit to just one based on where I was as even as a mother. So I would quite often be in conversation when first meeting people, and they'd say, "What do you do?" And I'd kind of freeze because I think, oh, if I tell you what I do, then I'm going to get the, oh, what don't you do, and blah blah. And I think, yeah, no, it's not about that. Like, if you looked at my life, yes, it's busy, but it was, everything had a connection and a purpose, and it was all wanting to be funneled into one thing, and that was my end goal, which was my dream, to have my own space, to have my own gallery, a collaborative space where I could share others' stories and journeys, but also showcase my own, but on my own terms.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't even sort of say that because people would be too bedazzled by what all the other little things I was doing. But I definitely had um, an end goal always hovering in the background. And it was one of those things where I thought, just keep it to yourself and, you know, let the actions, speak, or let it, when it finally comes to fruition, it'll all make sense to everyone.
Yeah, I think that that seems to be a common comment that we, not that we should say any of us artists are common, but a
Mm.
regular repeated comment that you see a lot of people who went to school, or I've taught some kids where they go to school and they're considered as not concentrating and distracted, and they don't like to toe the line, and that's not in a rebellious way. It's just like we could probably do this more creatively, or we could do it a different way, and you feel like institutions very, very frustrated. And that's the kind of oxymoron, I think, with being an artist, is they want you to be free and expressive, but only within the borderlines we give you. And so
Mm.
that's why you always tend to feel a little bit out of place,
Mhm.
because you don't really want to be in a team. You want to be different. You've got something, and you need to be in environments that feed that. And if you can't be in that one, I don't know if there's any one magical environment for that, then you go for a few. You
Yeah.
know, it sounds like that you were very creative in all the different things. I mean, even in the teaching, if you were tying the line, you know, you were frustrated because you couldn't be creative in doing, you know, providing what you wanted to do. It seems to be a repeated pattern for creatives. They're always, you know, we hear about master artists and they started teaching at an art school and then they left or they got kicked out because they couldn't hold their creativity. And so it's got to ooze out somewhere, right? Because otherwise you're not very good around other people. They've got to kind of let you go. So that sort of reflection of people say, oh, you do so much and things like, I like to learn, you know, I like to do
Yeah.
that. I kind of don't like
Absolutely.
out. And you strike me as that person too, coming from teaching as well, that it, that kind of fuels you as much as it will exhaust you. You feel like you're in the world and that you're moving the way you want through it, more than just being restricted, which some
Mm.
of those previous jobs that we did often felt like that. They started off being creative and then they worked out that you just had to be disobedient or obedient, and you wanted to be disobedient.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your art. So that, what subject matter do you, we're going to say paint, maybe talk about um, why you paint. Why do you paint?
Oh, paint.
What kind?
I feel like I can't not paint. It's
Correct. My answer.
yeah. It's just in me, like it is, it's lunchtime or it's painting time. It's just a daily. It's in my body clock. It's in my DNA. I mean, I grew up bushwalking with my grandfather in the
Uh-huh.
national park in Linfield, and that was every Saturday, and that gave me the same feelings as painting. So it was that wonderland, that escape, that just tapped into my imagination, my creative side,
Mhm.
and so trees were always, nature was always a big thing for me.
Mhm.
I definitely explored the idea of, portraiture for a long time because that sort of fed into that idea as a little child. That was more of an ego-based thing. Just
And it proves you can draw and paint, doesn't
yeah,
it? Draw a face.
all of that. And I have to say, because I would call myself a textural expressionist now, and sometimes, every now and then I'll just go back to doing a little bit of drawing just to remind myself that I do have those skills because after you've been working in a particular fashion, for an extended amount of time, you do lose yourself somewhat and can get a little bit too playful and then need to rein it in, come back and go back to the basics and
And the chords.
yeah, yeah. And it's I think that's become I've really the moment that I observed that in my own practice, it I that would help me get to the next level by pulling back and really evaluating any evolution or and then side putting that aside, looking at it as in okay, here's the evolution, but here's where I'm not moving forward. Maybe I need to pull right back to to gain some momentum again.
But I think that sort of reflection, that ability to reflect and understand that that's how you work and how it's part of your ingredients to how you like to work as an artist doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time, and you constantly feel like you're missing something, or how do you feed that inspiration all the time? So what subjects you mentioned, that the landscape and very much for international forest, or we would call it bushland. What other things inspire you? What is it in the landscape? Those trees. What is it about trees? Because there's a lot. You can't just sort of say trees. That
How
sort
much
of
how much time do you have really? No?
is it the how do you look at the trees? How do you, from your perspective as an artist, what are you trying to? What are the main things that you want to capture to show others in your work about those trees? You talked about moving through the space, and that reminds me a lot about Cezanne. So Cezanne's work and that sort of postmodern thing that we love about him. He used to call them sensations. So it's about a moving through the landscape, and you still maintain that. I know you maintain that bushwalking now. It's about moving through things, being in those space. So a lot of your work focuses on reflections and different dynamics about how you see the work, and to me a lot of that moving through space. But I want to know what captures your eye when you see a tree. Other people might look at the bark or the life of it. What is it? What is there something from the grandfather that, how did he teach you to see the landscape that might have oozed in through there? There's got to be a starting point. Is it the base? Is it the sky? Is it for us elemental people, what are the first things that stop you? Is it, I know there's a lot of light in your work, the way light filters through things. Is that one of the things that draws you to a particular place of inspiration?
You notice on social media, I always have the hashtags texture, layers, and light, and that's been my constant. So texture is a huge thing. The bark, I've always been rather fond of tree bark, but I have a secret obsession behind the scenes of the underground root system. The wood wide web of trees and and the science behind. But in terms of the aesthetic, the light for me has always been, it's because that's something that moves me, and I suppose it's connected to my spirituality and my connection to land and everything else. The same thing with flowers. I mean, I'm actually obsessed with listening to people whilst they're in situ in their gardening, telling me about, how they're planning the composition of the garden, the textures, the colours, seeing their eyes sparkle, and it's hard work gardening as well. So I sort of see that their planning and their grit as a
Very much
parallel
like
with me
painting.
in the studio. Yeah, exactly. And then you got my ocean. Yeah. And then you got the ocean work. So, there's three constants in terms of the series, and each require different, experimenting in the studio, a different practice. All of them are mixed media, palette knife, that's common denominator. But generally I work backward by design. So I will have some sort of vision of what I'd like to create, and then comes the experimenting, where there's a lot of that before the charcoal even reaches the canvas.
But what do you mean by experimenting? What do you do? Sketches? Do you do samples of color over the top? What's the physical thing about your experimentations?
It's mainly materials and how they interact with one another.
Okay.
And see, a lot of, because I have a heavy body textured medium.
Very heavy, everybody. Very heavy.
Very heavy.
On the wall.
It's there's a lot of drying time in between, and if it's a lot of humidity, that's going to affect things. So I always have like 5 works running simultaneously, and I'll go back and forth, and I do allow that space where for them to talk to me, if you like. I'll have them in my line of sight when I get up in the morning, placed around the house inside rather than the studio, and I'll have them in different spots during the day, and just allow for that with fresh eyes to see what I next need to do. I don't tend to rush anything. It's I have many works that are works in progress that I just feel that I know when I'm ready to come back to them.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a picture in mind of what you want them to look like in the beginning, or
I do.
You do?
I do, but I'm not completely attached to that either. I
Uh-huh.
think some of my best work has been where I've completely let go of that outcome halfway through.
If only you could do it more.
Yeah. Oh, look, it's I feel it's not like watercolor. Like mixed media is more forgiving in that way, and allows for me to indulge in the process and go back and forth, and to the point where I've chipped away at work and then worked back into it, and that's quite rewarding. I've always been good at seeing, like one of my strengths, I suppose, is finding a silver lining in work, having spent time away from it and coming back with the fresh eyes, and it's just like this light bulb, this moment of clarity where I think I had not seen that in the past because I had been too attached emotionally to the work. Once removed, it just all comes into and I
Mm.
just and that's where the magic, I suppose, happens. It doesn't always
But
happen.
each work has many lives.
Many lives, and why not? Why not? I say,
There's 10 paintings in everyone.
yeah.
So with the story, do you have a story that you attach to each artwork or each collection? Does it change? You've mentioned about the tactility and the light. I suppose they're themes.
Hmm.
But do you have particular stories? A lot of artists would have an artist statement about each artwork or the body of work. I know that you work in particular locations, where you live in North Epping, and are they particular? I don't know. Well, how do you create a body of work focused on something? Is there a narrative for that body of work, or is the narrative wider and more about the way you work?
It's a bit of both. I feel like I've kept the three series because they are interwoven with the way I judge my work as to how successful it is, and that is based on um, the final work, irrespective of whether it's the tree, flower, or ocean series. Within the composition, the audience should be able to move around 180 degrees, and dependent on the vantage point and the light source, the composition should change because that's how I view nature. So as long as it fits that criteria,
Okay.
I'm rather happy. That's what I want to communicate. In terms of individual narratives, it just depends on the series. I mean, Molly's Garden, Molly, who was a neighbor across the road, a beautiful lady, that was a series that went on for over a decade, painting her hydrangeas and different flowers in her garden,
Mm,
because I was completely and utterly taken aback by her level of enthusiasm and her passion for what she did and how she'd explain it. So that sort of really created this whole series, because every time I painted her hydrangeas, I'd be thinking about, how well she articulated her plans for that space, and how well she executed it. And I would look out the studio and there'd be these gorgeous, bulbous sculptural, you know,
mm.
very well planned, you know, pieces in her garden. And I think, wow, she had told me about that prior to them even coming, to life. And here she is. She's really, she'd have these complementary colors and textures. And I was really very impressed by Molly. So I felt like um, I owed it to her to have them live on forever through my paintings. And
I think
it's been,
it seems a lot of the work, even though if anyone who looks at your work, there's no human in your work, but it's very important that there is a connection between humans and the landscape for
yeah.
you. It's very prominent if and you just get a sentence out of you and that's what it is. And I think maybe to the viewer, that's our responsibility to work through, to make our own sensations, as Suzanne would call it, through
Mm.
your works. And that tactility is for us to experience. And everyone has its own story, and you visit these places differently. And sort of it sounds like your responsibility is to make those connections, to provide a platform for those connections. What you make in your work is your own story, and how your process is how you move through the landscape and how you transmit that and translate that. And then the rest of us, it's up to us to
Yeah.
integrate and connect with that. When we're talking about your mixed media materials,
Mm.
that's a whole lot of mixed media. Some of it can be secret stuff, but
Mm.
basically, I have a couple of questions. One, you mentioned that you paint with a palette knife.
Yes.
Why do you choose to use a palette knife over a brush or any other type of thing?
I do use both. I generally start off with, a charcoal markings, um, and then I'll move into an acrylic, like preliminary layer, just for placement of colours and forms. Um, and then I start building up with a brush, and then eventually we'll then negotiate, within the composition as to how much texture
Mm.
I want. I mean, the overall feedback from people when viewing my work, when I, hear them quite often I'll be at an exhibition and they don't know I'm there, and over here I just want to touch it, and you catch people touching it, and I think, well, yeah, don't, but I love that, because that's how I feel about nature. Like I feel like when I'm down in the bush, the one thing I do is I do walk up and I touch the bark, and that was
It's
always
a
my favorite.
connection, yeah, that you
Yeah,
talked about way back when, like it's
yeah.
still there, and you've kind of almost created a problem because people want to touch the
Well,
way.
yeah, I have
Give
actually
them
had
life.
I've had exhibitions where I have allowed people to touch, but I think now with COVID, we'll just back away from that. Um, yeah, but a palette knife does allow for me to create, you know, um, so many different markings and tactile markings, and then with that, create that play on light and shadow.
It's that
So
three-dimensional device
yeah,
you can use to move around work that still can be relatively flat,
yes,
um, whilst keeping depth, not just visual depth, but actual tactile depth.
yes.
Add that, and a lot of, I know that you use a bit of glass paint so it can be transparent, and the texture and the ridges in the paintings can provide that for you too. How do you judge the success of an artwork when you step away and go, okay, that's done?
Yeah.
What's your criteria for that?
Look, it's always hard when you're working with many layers to know when to stop, and when you've gone way too far. And I have thrown out many works, but I know when it's right, when I can hang it up in the gallery and take a step back, walk around, and it literally does look like, from every vantage point, a different work. And I feel, because I'm down in the bush, twice a day, quite often, morning and evening, just to gauge the light, and the difference in composition. I feel if that resonates in my work as well, irrespective of, again, whether it's ocean, trees, or flowers, then I feel really good about it. I feel like that is accurately translating what I'm experiencing when I'm experiencing nature.
Mm.
And I think, really, Kristine, I've tried different things, different subjects, and they just don't feel genuine. They're fun for a short time, but I come back to nature because I'm just I- there's nothing, it's even difficult to honor nature through painting because nature doesn't get it wrong. you know
It
uh,
will always outdo you.
yes, yes. So I do definitely, influenced by the impressionists, I do try and communicate a feeling. I'm definitely expressing a feeling. It's often fleeting, and want to capture that pocket of magic and just share that, because it's I suppose when I'm in the physical space, I have a great appreciation for the space, for example, down in the bush. But that feeling, that moment when I'm moved because the breeze through the trees and the light, dances around, I want to capture that.
Mm.
I could just take a photo, but that's not going to be enough. I want to capture the feeling based on the space and
Yeah,
translate that.
yeah, that sounds great. So all this you just mentioned when you go for a walk down the bush. So where are you based? Where do you create?
I'm just based in North Epping, but there's two spaces in particular that I will quite often stop and do a little sketch, and they're just, the path is a little bit extended. I'm not going to be taken out by a mountain biker or anything. Um, I've done little 9x12s, just little acrylic pieces down there. I don't apply the texture down there. I take a lot of photos, a lot of videos, and when I do come back and work in the studio, it's the walls are covered with information, if you like. But I have always had an excellent visual memory. If it's something that I'm really interested in, where I can close my eyes and um, pretty
Do
much sketch out. Yeah,
mm,
yeah. So
yeah,
that helps.
and do you have your own studio? Do
I
you?
do. I have many. I'm very lucky. So I have my lifelong dream came to fruition in 2019, where I built the Gallery 1111 in North Epping, where I paint. So we built that from scratch. It was, had a good couple of decades to think about how I wanted it designed, and worked with an architect. So it was based on the best possible light to provide the best possible experience for exhibiting artists and workshop participants. So that has been wonderful. And I do have 2 studio spaces that are often overrun with works in progress, and little podcast studios, and studios that were supposed to be painting studios, but they're forever in flux. So I sometimes paint inside my house. I paint where I can.
Space.
Yeah, where there's space. And I often paint in the gallery space. So I'll throw down a drop sheet. And the trick with that is when people walk past hiding, because, you can't afford yeah, everyone is so lovely. And especially if I'm working with resin, and I've broken it down into 5-minute increments over, 45 minutes. I can't have conversations or be disrupted, and I don't want to appear to be rude. So I have different spots. I've actually even painted in the kitchen out here before. So
I would imagine too that things take a while to dry. Like you just
yeah.
mentioned resin and a lot of the textural stuff. You can't just stack it up against each other. There's got to be a lot of, we'll call it in design world, layoff space.
Yeah.
And that kind of requires a little bit of creative space making, or rack drying, or you can get a bit of a feature that hangs down due to gravity, I would imagine. So quite a few features that might happen that you have to work, but I suppose it's definitely working through a space with that.
No, definitely. Look, and I feel grateful that I have many spaces that I can have work sitting and drying, or I can work in for an hour at a time and move around.
Sorry, do you feel, I think for most artists, that having the work around us, we kind of need, we're visual people, we really need the work around us to just add juice to those ideas, or keep looking at that sort of helps whilst it's messy to everybody else. I think that having that work surround you, I mean, you're building almost like your own forest around you with those works, so it feels like you're not that distant, you're not removed. I think that's why a lot of artists get a little bit itchy if you can't paint or draw or create in, if you've got a gap of a week or something, you almost might forget what are you doing, or work that muscle. It's a bit like scales in music, I suppose. We sort of need to do that, and it seems like having a lot of that work on process. Your work is very active to me. It's not only the textural stuff, there's a lot of activity in a still place, and maybe that's the lovely bit about nature. There's a lot of activity in what we would on the surface see as a quiet space, and I think that's why a lot of your works, if you look at Melony's work, that there's a lot happening in a still space, and I think that's one of the really nice things about it. So where can we get this work? Where do you sell? Do you sell your work across a number of platforms, or what are the main places that people can see your work or buy, look, all of that stuff?
Yeah, so I have obviously via my website, which is melonysmirniotis.com. But I have a body of work in my gallery 1111, constantly. But I'm represented by Brenda Colohan Fine Arts in Putney and Gallery 188 in Katoomba. So I feel like Gallery 1111 is in the centre here as a go-to for people to come and have a look. So my work is actually on display here in the gallery in between other artists coming in. So it's for 2 weeks of every month, pretty much. I'm also online, via Instagram, Facebook, through the Gallery 1111 website as well. I have an upcoming solo exhibition in November in Putney at Brenda Colohan Fine Arts. And I have a group show with the Outliers, including Ballard, at Gallery 188 Katoomba in September. So,
great. It's all really good. I think part of one of the strong points of you creating a gallery is to create a space where creatives can be active and connect. And I know that that's really important to you, and that's why we're making this thing.
Exactly.
But I think that that's a real strong point that comes through your work too. I'm yet to see a work where there's just one solitary tree in your work. It's all about community. Even if it's nature, there's never a one petal. There's never, the ocean isn't one drop. It's all moving together. So, Melony, I know that with a lot of your work, it's collaborative. I know that you really enjoy working with people together, and that's a real force and very much part of the ingredients of what you do, and that you go to a lot of effort to help people get on their own creative path as well. I'm not sure whether I can define that between the teacher in you or whether it's just that motivation to create a creative unit of that we can all help each other. And if you look at trees, I suppose they do that too. And maybe that's what's filtering through. Those roots under the ground are very much, I'm very aware that in your gallery there's a lot of roots under the ground, not quite connected yet. But I think that's a real admiration that people have for you, and it is coming through in the communities that you're creating. I know that you're working with the Indigenous cultures and the local network, and I think that that's a really beautiful thing that comes through all the work, that you work really, really hard, and it's very important to support each other. And it's the art life that we have now, not the art life that we've got in the future, or when we make $1 million on a painting or that. And you're kind of a living example of that. And that activity is really nice to see. And I think that with that's a really great thing that we can look forward to. And I think that everyone will be looking forward to the new works that you're making, and that the current works you're making, and all of that activity. And I suppose that our participation in that as viewers, as an audience, is to have a look and engage. And one of the things that you do with your work is very much about engagement. And often that exhausts you. And we must note that Melony actually has 3 children, and that are still all at school. So all of this activity that you hear Melony do, and she runs off to council meetings to connect with other people, the non-artistic stuff, she still manages to do a lot of that creative stuff behind the scenes. And I think that that's to be admired, and that we can all look at that as a little bit of an example to say, pull your finger out, stop complaining, and get on with it. But what comes of it is some really amazing work that is layered and textured. And sometimes we need a little bit longer to look at things, and maybe that's our lesson, listen to the trees. But anyway, Melony's got a lot of exciting things happening. And if you look at Gallery 1111, she works very hard at having, I don't know, about 1 million artists through there right now. There's lots of workshops and engagement. So it's not just being a fine artist. And I think the example that you've given us, Melony, is that everything counts along the way. That makeup along the way. And I know that you have done installation work, and maybe that's something that you look forward to in the future. You've done some installation work as well with light and sound and brain waves, which we don't have time to talk about today. But I'm sure that there'll be some more exciting things along the way, and you will look forward to seeing both of us more interviewing other artists. And that, I suppose, for both of us is very much what we're interested in and excited about, that letting others know the path behind or the story behind some of the works can really inspire others and help you get on with your work and be engaged in that creative community, even if it's just listening to us. So thank you, Melony. I think that everyone should go and have a look at Melony's work. You can find her everywhere, and turn up at a show and just have a little look and try and, if it makes you go for a walk into the bush or look at a flower another way, then I'm pretty sure, Melony, you'd be happy with that too. Absolutely. Even though you should really have a look at her works more. Anyway, thanks, Melony, and we'll talk to you soon on another Art and Up interview. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristine. See you.